The war had ended, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any battle. Captain Elias Ward of the human colony ship Aurora's Light stared at the ruined world below. Smoke and dust twisted through the broken towers of what was once the Zirath Empire's capital. The planet, once proud and vibrant, now looked like a graveyard of memories. Elias's hand tightened around the railing. He had seen death before, yes, but not loss like this. Not the kind that belonged to an entire civilization. And then there was her. Princess Sarai of Zirath, the last of her line. She moved through the ship's corridors with an elegance that was almost unnatural, like a melody caught in the middle of a storm. Her silver hair shimmered faintly under the artificial lights, brushing the edges of her dark, ceremonial armor. She did not speak. She did not look at anyone. Yet the weight she carried, the emptiness in her eyes, spoke louder than words. Elias first noticed the markings on her back armor. Etched symbols, glowing faintly like the stars outside, told the story of her lineage, her people, and the empire that had fallen. He couldn't look away. There was something heartbreaking and beautiful about her, something fragile and eternal at the same time. That's when she stopped and turned. Her voice was soft but sharp, like ice cutting through metal. "Why are you staring at my back, human?" Elias blinked, startled. He had expected anger, maybe contempt, not a question that felt so raw, so human. Because... He hesitated, unsure how to explain the feeling welling up inside him. Because it's the only part of you that isn't broken. Her lips trembled slightly. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just studied him with those glowing eyes, and for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of something human behind the armor of a princess. Elias wanted to speak again, to tell her that she didn't have to be the last, that she didn't have to carry the weight of her people alone. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped aside, giving her space, yet staying close enough that she could see he was there. Days passed, and the silence between them grew, but so did a strange understanding. Sarai walked the corridors of the ship, her movements graceful, but distant like someone carrying invisible chains. Crew members whispered and avoided her. To them, she was a symbol of their enemy, a reminder of friends they had lost and planets they had fought for. But Elias did not avoid her. He brought her tea, quietly, in the observation deck, where she often sat staring at the stars. He asked her questions, soft, careful questions about her home, her oceans, her people. She rarely answered at first. Only the tiniest nods, only the quietest hums escaped her lips. Yet he persisted, because humans, he thought, had a way of reaching through walls others built. One evening, as the artificial sun of the ship's deck faded into dim orange, she spoke for the first time. "Why do you humans care so much about others?" Her voice was almost a whisper, fragile like glass. Elias looked at her, his own heart aching. "Because loneliness is heavier than war," he said softly. She said nothing after that, but her gaze lingered. For the first time, she did not look at him with suspicion or hate. She looked at him as someone who understood, even if only a little. And in that quiet moment between the ruins of a fallen empire and the fragile hope of humanity, a bridge began to form. Small, tentative, yet unbroken. Elias did not know if she would ever trust him fully, but he knew this. She was not just a princess, not just a survivor. She was a soul who had seen everything fall, and he would do whatever he could to show her that even in the darkness, someone could care. And maybe, just maybe, she could allow herself to feel that care. The days on the Aurora's Light passed, slowly, filled with the quiet hum of engines and the occasional chatter of the crew. Princess Sarai moved like a shadow through the halls, graceful yet distant. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was in clipped sentences, careful words that measured every sound. The crew avoided her, unsure how to treat the last princess of the Zirath Empire. To them, she was a living reminder of the empire that had caused so much death. But Captain Elias Ward did not avoid her. He continued his visits, bringing small comforts, a cup of tea, a warm blanket, or just his quiet presence. He would sit, nearby in the observation deck, watching her gaze drift endlessly into the void of stars, and sometimes he would speak softly about the planets they passed, the colonies they helped, the small miracles of human life that persisted despite war. At first she ignored him, staring past his shoulder as though he were invisible. But slowly she began to respond, not with words but with small gestures. A nod here, a faint hum there. Elias noticed that her shoulders, once always stiff, relaxed a little when he was near. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she would trace her fingers along the edge of her armor, lost in memories of a world she could never return to. One evening, Elias found her sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at a distant, dying star. "Do you ever miss your home?" he asked softly. Sarai didn't answer at first. Her eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the light of the star. I miss everything," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, almost broken. The oceans, the music, the streets of the capital, all of it, gone now. Elias nodded, his chest tightening. "I can't imagine what that feels like," he admitted. "But I know that holding on to it all, alone, can be worse than losing it." She turned slightly toward him, her silver hair catching the light. For the first time, she allowed herself to speak more openly. "Your people, you care so much for one another, even strangers, even enemies sometimes. Why? Why is that so important to humans?" Elias smiled faintly, sadness in his eyes. "Because loneliness is heavier than war. Because sometimes the only thing that keeps you alive is knowing that someone else cares, even if you never see them again." Sarai's lips trembled. She looked away, ashamed of the small warmth that stirred in her chest. She had spent her life learning to hide her feelings, to appear strong and untouchable. Yet here was a human, fragile and flawed, showing her something she had almost forgotten: compassion. Over the following days, a quiet bond began to form. Elias shared stories of human colonies, of small victories, of laughter that rose above pain. Sarai began to listen, and sometimes she would even speak, recalling her own childhood memories, moments of joy that the war had not completely stolen. She spoke of the music of Zirath, the sounds that could make mountains weep and seas roar. Elias listened, fascinated by the beauty and sorrow wrapped together in her words. It was in these moments of shared silence and soft conversation that Sarai began to see humans not as enemies but as beings capable of hope, resilience, and love. And Elias, in turn, saw her not as a fallen princess or a symbol of war, but as a survivor, a soul who had seen the worst and yet still had the courage to keep moving forward. One night, as the ship drifted through a calm sector of space, Sarai finally said something that made Elias's heart tighten. "Do you think I could ever belong somewhere again?" Her voice was small, almost afraid of the answer. Elias reached out, lightly touching her hand. "Yes," he said simply. "You belong wherever you choose to belong, and you don't have to do it alone." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarai allowed herself a small, fragile smile. It was a smile not for the world, not for the humans who watched her with suspicion, but for herself. And in that moment, the bond between human and princess grew stronger, not because of war or politics, but because of the quiet understanding of two broken worlds learning to heal together. The days grew longer aboard the Aurora's light, but the routine brought little comfort. Princess Sarai still wandered the corridors quietly, watching humans go about their lives with laughter, frustration, and sometimes kindness. She envied them, their noise, their chaos, their ability to care so openly. Her own people had been so different. Disciplined, proud, and cold. Zirath had prized perfection over emotion. Now, all that remained of her world was memory and sorrow. Elias noticed her watching the crew one evening in the mess hall. A group of humans argued over a failed meal. Voices raised, but smiles crept across their faces as they worked through the problem. Sarai's eyes softened just slightly. She turned away quickly, embarrassed that someone had caught her observing them. Elias found her later in the engineering bay. She was standing near a corner, silent as ever, while he worked on a damaged drone. Oil smeared across his uniform and sparks flew as he soldered a broken circuit. He glanced up, surprised to see her there. "You should not be here," he said, though his voice held warmth, not admonishment. "I wanted to see how humans fix things," she replied quietly. Her words were hesitant, like she was testing if it was safe to speak. Elias smiled faintly. "Then stay. Keep me company." She hesitated. For a moment she looked unsure, afraid perhaps of getting close. But curiosity overcame caution. She stepped forward and sat on a nearby bench, watching his hands work with skill and precision. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax just a little. They worked in silence at first, the only sound being the hum of machines and the occasional spark of solder. Then Elias handed her a small repaired metal charm. "A gift," he said simply. "For luck." Sarai turned the charm over in her hands, examining it. "My people do not believe in luck," she whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe that's why they fell," Elias replied gently. Her breath caught, and she looked at him. For a moment, no words came. She had spent centuries learning to hide her vulnerability, yet here was a human offering her something small, something ordinary, and it felt like hope. You do not fear me?" she asked finally, her voice soft. "I fear nothing that needs my trust," he said, meeting her gaze. "And I think you need someone to trust right now." Sarai did not respond immediately. She held the charm tightly, feeling a strange warmth she had not known in years. Her back straightened slightly, her posture still regal but less burdened. The tiniest glimmer of trust flickered in her eyes, fragile and hesitant but real. Over the next few days, she began accompanying Elias more often, helping in small ways in the engineering bay. She did not speak much, but her presence was comforting. She even allowed herself to laugh quietly at his small mistakes, though she quickly hid it. Elias never mentioned it. He understood that trust was built slowly, like careful stitches in torn fabric. One evening, while they worked on a failing drone, Sarai finally spoke. I had forgotten that helping someone could feel good," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Elias nodded, not taking his eyes off the machine. "It's not just good. It's necessary. Humans survive because they care, because they reach out, even when everything is broken." She glanced at him, her silver eyes reflecting the glow of the tools. "And if I fail?" "You won't," he said simply. "Not if you try, and not if you let someone help you." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarai allowed herself to feel less alone. She had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, not all humans were enemies. That maybe some could understand pain without using it as a weapon. That maybe even she could begin to heal. In the quiet hum of the engineering bay, a fragile bond had begun, one not forged in battle or politics, but in small, human moments. And though she would never admit it aloud, Princess Sarai felt something she had almost forgotten, the first glimmer of trust. The calm aboard the Aurora's light did not last. One morning, alarms echoed through the corridors, loud and urgent, shaking the quiet that Sarai had begun to feel safe in. The ship's communication panel crackled, and a holographic display projected the faces of Zirath loyalists, survivors who had refused to surrender. Their ships glimmered in the void, sleek and deadly, but the threat was not just military, it was personal. They demanded the return of Princess Sarai. Elias stood at the command console, his hands steady despite the tension. "They want her back," he said, voice low. "If we refuse, they'll attack." Sarai stepped forward, her expression calm but her hands trembling slightly. "Then they will destroy themselves trying to get me," she said, voice hard yet quiet. Her back stiffened, the old armor of her royal identity rising like a wall. "You would fight your own kind?" Elias asked, concern threading through his words. "They are not my kind anymore," she said firmly. "They live in the past. I must live now." Elias wanted to argue, to remind her that sometimes the right choice was to survive strategically, not just emotionally, but he saw the determination in her eyes, and he knew she was beyond persuasion. Not yet, anyway. The Zirath ships moved closer, their weapons charged. The Aurora's light crew readied defenses, tension gripping everyone like a tight cord. Sarai watched the approaching ships, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Memories rushed back, childhood lessons on honor, strategy, and loyalty. Faces of old friends and teachers flickered in her mind, many of them lost to war. Her hands clenched into fists, but she did not order an attack. Elias stepped beside her quietly. "You don't have to do this alone," he said gently. "You don't have to become who they expect you to be. You are not them. You are Sarai." Her eyes flicked to him, and for a fleeting second the stern princess vanished, leaving only a woman torn between the past and the present. Her mind screamed with responsibility, with guilt, with fear, but his presence was a quiet anchor. The battle began. Cannons roared and lasers streaked across the void. Sarai's heart ached at the sight of the ships. Beautiful, deadly ships that reminded her of her childhood pride. She could not bring herself to give the order that would destroy them completely. Elias reached for her hand, a gesture small but grounding. "You don't have to be the monster your past expects. Be yourself. Survive. Protect those who are here now." Tears formed in Sarai's eyes, not just from fear but from the weight of her choices. She realized that the past could not define her anymore. She could honor her people without repeating their mistakes. She could survive, not as a symbol of an empire, but as a bridge between worlds. The battle ended with the Zyroth loyalists retreating, unable to breach the ship's defenses. The silence afterward was deafening, a heavy mixture of relief and sorrow. Sarai sank into a chair, trembling. She had survived, but not without cost. Elias knelt beside her. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You survived, and you chose your own path. That is strength, not weakness." She turned her head, silver hair falling across her face. "Strength. Feels like a curse sometimes," she whispered. "All my life I was taught to be strong, to be perfect. And still, everything fell." "You are not alone in this," Elias said firmly. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Not anymore." For the first time, Sarai allowed herself to lean against someone. Not just a human, not just a captain, but a friend who did not judge her for her past. The stars outside the observation deck glimmered like distant promises. Somewhere in the vastness of space, she felt the possibility of a future she could choose. Not one dictated by sorrow or duty. The shadows of her past would always linger. But she understood something vital now. Survival was not just about strength or pride, it was about choosing life, choosing hope and letting someone stand beside you when the world felt too heavy. And in that quiet moment, amid the wreckage of her people's legacy, Princess Sarai realized that maybe, just maybe, she could begin to live again. After the battle with the Zyroth loyalists, the Aurora's light felt emptier than ever. The silence that followed was heavy, and Princess Sarai could not shake the images from her mind. The glowing weapons of her people, the ships she had loved like children, destroyed in a war she had survived but could not control. Every corner of the ship seemed to echo with ghosts, whispers of lives and legacies that were gone forever. Sarai locked herself in her quarters, avoiding everyone, even Elias. She refused meals and remained silent, staring at the stars outside her window as though searching for answers among the distant light. Her hands shook as she held her pendant, the small metal charm Elias had given her months ago. It should have been a comfort, a symbol of trust, but all it brought now was the weight of guilt. Elias, patient as ever, did not leave her alone. He knocked softly, waiting for her to answer. When she did not, he entered quietly. He did not sit, did not speak, just stood near her and waited. After long minutes of silence, Sarai finally spoke, her voice brittle. "Why did you stop me from destroying them?" she asked, tears welling in her silver eyes. "They were my people, my family. I should have let them fall." "Let me fall with them. It would have been easier." Elias knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand over hers. "Because you deserve a future," he said simply. "Because survival is not weakness, Sarai. Your people fell for pride, for anger, for refusal to see the world as it is. Don't let that be your legacy. You are more than the empire you were born into." Her hands tightened around the pendant and she drew a shaky breath. "You don't understand. My name, my blood. It is a curse. Everything I touch dies or fades or is taken from me." "Then let me share it with you," Elias said softly, his gaze unwavering. "Humans survive because we carry each other's pain. You don't have to bear this alone." "Not anymore." For a long time she said nothing. Her tears fell freely now, and Elias did not try to stop them. Slowly, the walls she had built around herself, the walls of pride, of duty, of fear, began to crumble. She leaned against him, her forehead resting lightly on his shoulder. Not as a princess. Not as a symbol, just as a woman who had lost everything and finally allowed herself to feel again. The storm inside her raged, yet Elias's presence was steady, quiet, and unwavering. He did not demand strength. He did not ask her to forgive herself. He simply let her be human, let her break, and in that space something fragile but real began to grow. Trust. After hours of silence, Sci-FI finally spoke again. Do humans always help each other? Even when it is dangerous, even when it could cost you everything? Elias smiled faintly, a tired but sincere curve of his lips. We try, because we understand what it means to lose. And sometimes we do it for someone we barely know, or someone who needs it more than we realize. Sarai's lips quivered. Then maybe there is hope. Maybe there is something beyond the past. Yes, he said gently. Hope is always there, even when you can't see it. For the first time in weeks, Sarai allowed herself to rest, her head still leaning against his shoulder. She let herself breathe, let herself feel the warmth of another being beside her, and in that small act the storm began to fade. Not entirely, for the past was never far, but enough that she could see a path forward. Elias remained there, silently, understanding that healing was not a single act but a journey. And in that quiet, intimate space, Princess Sarai began to understand that she could survive, not by being perfect, not by carrying her people's legacy alone, but by allowing herself to live, to trust, and to be human again. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. Months had passed since the battle with the Zirath loyalists, and life aboard the Aurora's Light had settled into a quiet rhythm. Princess Sarai had started to walk among the crew again, her silver hair catching the artificial lights as she moved. Though she remained distant at times, the walls around her had begun to crumble, and her smile, small, fragile, but real, appeared more often. The human crew had come to respect her, not as a princess of a fallen empire, but as someone who had survived unimaginable loss and found the strength to keep moving. Yet the past always lingered. Zirath loyalists still existed, and the galaxy had not forgotten her. And now the ship approached Earth, the homeworld of humanity. Blue oceans, green forests, and countless lights of civilization spread below, alive and vibrant. Standing in the observation deck, Sarai felt her chest tighten. She had never seen a planet like this, full of life and warmth. After so long surrounded by destruction, Elias joined her, silent at first, watching her reaction. It's beautiful, she whispered, almost afraid that her voice might shatter the moment. All this, it survived. Elias smiled softly. Yes, and so can you. You don't have to hide anymore. The United Council of Earth had extended an offer: asylum, protection, and a place among humans. But they also offered her a choice. She could become a bridge between worlds, a symbol of peace and understanding. Or she could retreat, disappear quietly into exile, living among humans in anonymity. Sarai felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. To speak before the council was to step fully into a new life, to face scrutiny, judgment, and the expectations of two species. To vanish quietly was safe yet lonely, a life shadowed by the past she could never escape. Elias placed a hand gently on her arm. What will you do? He asked softly. His eyes were steady, patient, giving her space to decide. Sarai turned to him, silver eyes shimmering with uncertainty. Memories of her fallen empire, her lost family, and the battles she had survived flickered through her mind. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, but she also felt something new, a fragile courage born from months of trust, care, and hope. I will not hide, she said finally, her voice firm but trembling. If my people's story ends, let it end with peace, not bitterness. I want to help, to try. Elias nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Then the galaxy will see what humans and Zirath can build together. The journey to the council hall was tense. Crew members whispered, eyes following the last princess of Zirath as she walked with Elias at her side. When she entered the hall, all chatter fell silent. Humans and alien delegates alike turned to her, She felt a tremor of fear, but Elias's hand on hers grounded her. She stepped forward, drawing strength from the months of quiet conversations, shared moments, and trust built with the human captain who had refused to leave her side. Her voice, when it came, was clear and strong, yet carried the softness of someone who had known pain and survived it. "I stand here not as the ruler of a fallen empire," she said, her words echoing through the hall. "I stand here as a survivor. I have seen loss and I have seen hope. I choose peace. I choose understanding. I choose to help build a future where humans and Zirath can live together, not as enemies but as allies." Whispers spread through the hall. Some were skeptical, some hopeful, but all listened. Sarai met Elias's gaze, and in that look she found reassurance. She had made her choice. Outside, the stars of a new colony glimmered like distant promises. She felt the weight of the past, yes, but also the possibility of a future she could shape with her own hands. No longer defined solely by the empire she came from, she was free to define herself, her path, and her purpose. And for the first time in years, she smiled fully. Not small, not fragile, but strong. She had chosen life, hope, and the chance to make a difference, and she knew whatever came next, she would not face it alone. Years passed, and Princess Sarai's presence among humans became more than a symbol. It became a bridge. She traveled between worlds, speaking to humans and Zirath survivors alike, helping to heal wounds that had festered for decades. Her silver hair, once a mark of distant royalty, now reflected the warmth of a life rebuilt, of connections forged not through blood or power, but through compassion and understanding. Elias remained by her side, not as a guard, not as a savior, but as a companion who had seen her at her weakest and never turned away. Together they visited colonies, negotiated peace, and shared stories of survival. Yet despite all the work, Sarai often found herself standing alone on observation decks, staring at the stars, remembering the ruins of her homeworld. The memories of the empire she had lost lingered, but they no longer chained her. One evening, on a distant colony orbiting a twin sun system, Sarai found herself on the balcony, watching the golden light dance across the ocean-like rivers below. Elias approached quietly, his presence comforting as always. She did not speak, only let herself breathe in the warmth of the setting suns. After a long moment, she finally asked softly, "Do you still stare at my back, human?" Elias laughed, a gentle, warm sound that made her chest lift with relief. "No," he said. "I stare at how far you've come, at the strength you didn't know you had, the hope you dared to embrace, and the heart that finally learned to trust." Sarai turned fully toward him, silver eyes glistening. "Then, perhaps I was wrong about humans," she said, a small, genuine smile forming on her lips. I thought humans were fragile, that your lives were too short to understand loss, too quick to forget pain." Elias shook his head. "Humans are fragile," he admitted. "But that fragility allows us to feel deeply, to connect and to heal. You've seen that now. You've become a part of it." She studied him for a long moment, feeling the weight of her past and the lightness of her present intertwine. "And you helped me see that. You didn't ask me to be anyone else. You just let me be human." Elias took her hand gently, firmly, a quiet anchor in the vastness of the universe. "That's what humans do," he said. "We carry each other, even when the galaxy feels too large, too empty, too cruel. We survive together, and now, so do you." The twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the colony. Sarai felt a warmth she had not known in decades, a peace that came not from power, not from surviving alone, but from being seen, understood, and accepted. She had faced loss, war, and the weight of an empire's expectations, but she had chosen hope, compassion, and trust, and in doing so she had become something greater than a princess. She turned fully to Elias, her voice steady now, filled with emotion and quiet strength. "Then we continued together. For them, for the humans, for Zirath, for a future worth living." Elias smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Together," he agreed. From that balcony, overlooking the glowing rivers and golden sands, Sarai understood something she had never known in her palace long ago. The universe could be cruel, kingdoms could fall, and empires could vanish. But the human heart, fragile and resilient, could endure anything. It could love, forgive, and build something new from the ashes. And in that enduring, fragile human heart, she had found her own place. Not as a princess of a fallen empire, not as a survivor alone, but as a bridge, a teacher, a friend, and a part of something larger than herself. The stars above twinkled like distant witnesses to her journey, silent, eternal, and full of promise. Sarai took a deep breath, feeling the future in her chest not heavy with duty or sorrow, but light with hope and purpose. For the first time, she truly smiled, without fear, without hesitation. She had survived. She had trusted. She had loved. And humanity, in all its fragile beauty, had shown her that even in loss, there could always be light. And somewhere, across the galaxy, the echoes of her first question remained, transformed from doubt to wonder. Why are you staring at my back, human? Because even in sorrow, humanity had found beauty, and she had found it too.